Okay, now that we're recording, I'll say welcome everybody to the February 3rd Public Steering Committee meeting. My name is Christoph. I will be the bosun for today. We also have our Kubernetes Code of Conduct for this meeting and all meetings. Please be excellent to each other. So the first topic on the agenda today was the steering panel for Amsterdam. We did get that approved. We are expecting 5 of the 7 steering committee members in Amsterdam for that panel. The schedule may end up moving around specifically because it looks like there's a conflict with a different session that Nikita and I are doing for Contrib-X, but we're going to sort that out. But that is set. We're just going to do kind of like another AMA, but we're also going to, we have some learnings and takeaways from the session in San Diego for how we can make it a little bit better and make it a little bit more valuable, especially to folks that may not know what we do.
Should we file an issue track to make sure that we're good on who's going to make the slides? Because I think decided that we were going to do like 1 to 2 slides. Okay, yeah. I'll do an action on that one.
That would be fantastic. Yeah. Any other questions, comments, or concerns on our presence at Amsterdam? Nope. Okay, moving on. Nikita, you have the next item here about user groups.
Yeah, so this was something we had discussed in the last private steering committee meeting, and we thought about bringing this on again when more folks who were on the previous steering committee committee were present, since they'd have more context. So the question that we were talking about was mainly about the rationale and the thinking behind what was the reason user groups were created as a part of the Kubernetes community structure, and if it would make sense to move them to CNCF user groups instead.
I don't have strong opinions about the CNCF user groups, but I'll give you the context for why they were created in the first place. Is because some calls where, especially in cloud providers, was the main area where the cloud provider individual SIGs, when they originally created, ended up becoming like a user forum group. And we wanted to sort of collapse that work underneath a single cloud provider, kind of dedupe a bunch of that. And then that would enable folks to have user group sessions where they could talk to each other and solve their problems. I don't necessarily know if that makes a ton of sense to put it in a general CNCF user group area, because it's very Kubernetes specific. Most of them are talking about provider specific integrations and they're helping each other. It's very low overhead from a community perspective to monitor and maintain. It's just basically you give them a Slack channel and you give them the capability to have a meeting if they want one, if they request one, but that's pretty much it. So the objective was to provide a forum for users to self-service and select in and out of it.
Yeah, I think, Tim, the other example, I thought we discussed this previously, was when we were rationalizing the SIG structure, there were SIGs that didn't own code, and rather than, for better or for worse, lose their stature or presence that already existed in the community, I think SIG Big Data was one of those. They had moved to a user group as well. So I think the big data style use case is more one that felt appropriate for a CNCF user group than maybe what we had traditionally in, was a SIG at one point, or yeah, I think it was a SIG at one point in Cube. And so for that style scenario, I think CNCF's right home. I think for the various infrastructure providers, I'm not sure if that makes sense at the CNCF user group level either. I'm not Not as familiar with that yet.
So are their meetings being held? Do we know if they are making progress? Do we know if they're active?
We do know that some of the, we haven't looked at all of them. And in fact, you know, my history might be dated, but we do know that there's a fair amount of the cloud provider stuff that is active that I'm aware of. It's basically users trying to help each other. I do not know how active it is, to be honest. And I don't know if all of the details are publicized for that.
Yeah, so I'd be curious. I'd be happy to take the to-do to follow up on how often, say, the user group big data group is meeting to see if it actually makes sense to continue. The only other user group that I'm aware that we're discussing is the VMware users group. I'm not aware of there being other like AWS user groups or Google Cloud ones, but it's possible I'm missing something.
Those are the only two like officially sanctioned ones that have like gone through and like have an entry in SIGSAML and that kind of stuff. I don't know how the cloud provider, like the SIGs that used to be SIGs that were moved under SIG Cloud Provider but still host their own like cloud provider specific meetings. I don't know how much of those meetings is user support like kind of stuff versus actually focusing on like cloud provider code.
I can only speak from history. We did notice that like AWS had taken a turn for support style thing for a while ago, especially as, you know, Kubernetes took up in popularity. I do not know about the other ones though. It'd be interesting if somebody be able to like give a broad update or like walk through where everybody's at.
I can take it as an action item to go through the current user groups and, well, big data and figure out where they're at.
The other thing from like a very broad perspective that we like, it was very briefly mentioned at the last meeting, but like having thought about it some more, I actually kind of like the idea, is Paris had brought up the potential of having like a like an Apache style, like, hey, is your group alive? Are you meeting? And just kind of like polling that like all the chair, like in this case, it'd be like chairs and leads, because we in our particular structure, but basically just to check in that like, hey, everybody who's listed as a lead for a particular, you know, group, whether it's a SIG user group, working group, committee, that, hey, are you alive? Are you meeting? Are you meeting regularly? Is everybody who's listed as a leader in your group still like active and responsive in it? And just kind of having that poll and check in on some sort of cadence.
I think if we do an audit, we should do it like holistically, not just are the SIGs there, are they active, but like, you know, verifying owners files and maintenance of the other sub projects and their other assets that are associated with it. Because it'd be like, I think a yearly audit makes a ton of sense, right? Because when I went through recently a bunch of owners files, like I pruned a ton of Googlers out of owners files that they hadn't been around for like years, right? And they were listed as maintainers and owners of things, and it just didn't make any sense. So I think if we do an audit, it's not just of leadership, but it's of everything. Audit the whole thing.
Are you suggesting like pushing that down onto the SIGs and say like, hey, so from like steering, we go and just check in with you and make sure that you're alive. But as a part of that, you know, as leadership of the SIG, Now your responsibility as part of that roll call is, hey, I'm going to go and like list off, here's what we have for your group in sigs.yaml. Is that still accurate? Do you want to go and update your owner's files? All that kind of stuff.
This is a little weird because I think it would be, some SIGs might not be that healthy, right? So if you were to say that, it might go into a vacuum. When we originally did the creation of all of these SIGs and the community structure that we originally had, there was usually some person on the steering committee that was working with the SIGs to help them get their charters up in place. Right? It might make sense to have like to federate it out across the steering committee, to have like each individual member of the steering committee take 1 or 2 or 3 SIGs and ensure and work with those chairs to ensure that like things are up to snuff and up to date.
So I think when we discussed this last time, like definitely +1 on the idea of the health checker roll call. But back to the topic of user groups, it's unclear to me what principle we would have right now to guide creation of new user groups. And if, for example, we came back from an analysis and said, hey, the big data user group maybe better fit in a CNCF home, what would be our guiding principle for taking on new user group proposals in the community is what I'm trying to figure out. Because I feel like it was a point in time. But if we have, as long as they have it as a concept, when would we choose to accept new ones?
I know that like our current governance docs have like a guideline listed out. Like we do have a guideline on what constitutes and what qualifies as a user group. I think it probably needs revision though, because one thing that came out of the provisioning experience for the VMware users one, this is the issue that Stephen Wong over at VMware had opened up, kind of about his experience. The thing that I'm not necessarily comfortable with is that it's kind of like a lazy consensus to spin up a user group. I think that's the only part that I am like have concern about, just because like we haven't had a whole bunch of takers on spinning up a user group and what that really means. But I also would not necessarily want that to get out of control. I think like explicitly, like, you know, whether it's, you know, in this case, steering, like pulling a yes, like explicit yes, you can have a user group once a proposal is in. I think being explicit about that is good because it just lets us keep it from getting out of control. But there is a guideline. Just looking at the link.
Like, just trying to think through this, like, would we have a Tigera user group, or would we have an Edge user group? Would we have a Amazon user group? Like, what, some of those things feel different than others. And to your point, Chris, we don't really have a great, I don't like lazy consensus either. And some folks might feel differently on a number of them, but like I could see this being a future state, I guess. And I don't know if that's a desired state.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Steve's got his hand up.
Yeah, I've got a few comments to add on the history of what went down with user groups. One of it was that the cloud providers actually were holding meetings related to cloud providers that were drawing users, asking support questions, submitting feature requests. And when those cloud provider SIGs got folded underneath the umbrella of the cloud provider, one of the things that came up in those discussions, and I think it was a key element of why the cloud provider SIGs agreed to go along with it, was that it was announced that there would be a provision for starting user groups aligned with specific cloud providers. And there was a history in the VMware SIG. Frankly, I'd say half the content in over a year's worth of meetings was user focused. So this may vary from one cloud provider to another, but that was part of the history with why that user group section of the SIG working group thing got edited to allow for user group creation. I think the big data one was a legacy one that just named themselves a user group before an official process got documented. So they've been out there a while.
See, that was the example of the user group that existed when they was discovered they didn't own any code. And so we made them no longer a SIG and said, okay, well, you can still be in the community umbrella, but you're now a user group.
Yeah, and frankly, I think there's others that belong arguably in the category. I'm a co-lead of the IoT Edge working group. Essentially, the meetings are filled with users. There are no developers and it owns no code. I've sampled machine learning. I'd call that the same thing, although there's so little activity in that, it's tough to get a read. But some of these working groups I would contend are vastly composed of users. And I think if you were to rename them user groups, it's probably more accurate. I don't think for the IoT Edge, I think it's perfectly functional. I wouldn't try to change it. Would it make sense? I see in the notes, I missed the beginning of this meeting because I joined late, but would it make sense to be in the CNCF instead? Maybe I'd say maybe with regard to IoT Edge, simply because it's crossing over into other CNCF projects in addition to Kubernetes. For the VMware one, it is strictly Kubernetes, so probably no, my opinion. I saw in the notes somebody asked a question of what was the state. So with the VMware user group, we're just about to get started. I've got a poll for picking a meeting time, although we may fall into the old time for the old VMware SIG, but the poll is open through today, and it looks like we might have our first Zoom meeting under this umbrella this week. We do have a session slated for KubeCon Europe, and I do have people telling me they're coming to it. I think people have already registered in the SCED system, so it does appear to be drawing some interest. I just got contacted by some independent group in Amsterdam that wants to hold like an evening social as well and invite members. So I think this one is looking, it's the first one, but it looks like it's in a position to gain some traction. I know in the cloud provider SIG, the people from the old AWS or Amazon, I forget what the official name of their cloud provider SIG was, but they've made statements in the cloud provider SIG meetings that they're watching VMware SIG to see how it goes on before putting in an application to start an AWS SIG. So I think that you are likely to see at least one more application, say sometime in the next few months. Whether there'd be a huge onslaught of these, I don't know. But you could probably look at the old cloud providers and see what their meeting frequency was to get some rough estimate of how likely it is. But I would guess you're not going to see some scenario of 10, 20 cloud provider associated user group applications come to you.
Paris, you had your hand up?
I was going to say, I wonder if this is something that Cheryl with the end user community at CNCF could help us with, because I know she's also been looking for ways to connect that community to upstream developers. I mean, we had a panel with them at the community at the contributor summit. So I'm wondering if we can have them create the intentional space there, and really link up that community with some of the upstream work that's going on without it necessarily being in our community infra. Especially now that the like I'm attempting to propose this SIG too, this contributor experience SIG. And one of the things I'm going to try to do is better educate end users on how to be better contributors. So I'm wondering if that's something that could all get wrapped up together.
I guess like the other thing that we should define, and like another kind of refinement if we continue to have user groups under our umbrella, is like, as I think was Derek who mentioned this a few minutes ago, like it's kind of like a very light level of support that we're wanting to give these folks. Like, hey, we want to give a place for you to congregate and talk about things, but that's about it. Because like supporting users isn't core to what we're doing on the Kubernetes project. We're a lot more focused on code. We're a lot more focused on contributors and features and supporting those bases. Actually supporting end users isn't core to what we're doing as an open source project, but also it's important for those groups to both have places to congregate and for us to be listening, like there to be some sort of communication channel between that, so that we know what user groups are saying kind of in general, because that feedback will make us as a project better. So whether that is housed at the CNCF level or whether that's housed at our level, as long as we define kind of like what that light touch is, I think that's beneficial. It also kind of ties in with a thought that I'm having around, we recently had some conversations with the CNCF about like who qualifies for maintainer track sessions at KubeCon. And that may be something that like we explicitly define, like, okay, if you're a SIG and you own code, you can have a maintainer track session, but maybe user groups and stuff don't qualify under that same umbrella because they're not necessarily maintainers of Kubernetes code. So the point being, defining explicitly like what light touch support we are providing to user groups explicitly, I think is beneficial if we're going to maintain user groups as a organization.
Well, my observation is if you look at your sponsored things like conferences, you are supporting user groups, and the case study sessions are some of them. They had some of the highest attendance at KubeCon in November, and they've been going on for years. So the users are there. Some of these things, like I say, some of them are officially named user groups. Some of them are de facto user groups, even if they're called working groups. And this has been going on for years. Some of these sessions, like the IoT Edge, have drawn 250 people to a session. The users are showing up, and they seem to be getting some value out of it. I think that you want a scenario where and not every contribution to Kubernetes is code. I mean, these users can contribute in the forms of documentation. Frankly, good bug reports, feature requests are contributions. So I think that you don't want to create this black line and kick them out of the community. They belong.
So maybe we could focus next step. So I think the first thing as a group here we need to do is one, like fact finding, right? So are there working groups that don't have a terminal end state? Like a working group is supposed to be objective focused and then delegate back to the SIGs. If we feel there are working groups that are not meeting that criteria and they should probably slot under a user group definition, like let's audit that. So like first action item should be to do that audit of our working group list. Second action is for the user groups that are identified, are they meeting and active? And if they are, that's a piece of factual information we don't have now. Third, I think would be useful is having the CNCF provide guidance on what the actual SIGs are that they're producing now. And if there's overlap with a legacy working group or a user group that's existing in Kube, probably on a point-by-point basis, we should ask, do you fit more rightly in the CNCF user group community or the SIG in the CNCF than within Kube, and we can take that on a basis by basis point. Um, personally, I feel like it's users are going to need to meet and congregate somewhere, and so I'm not trying to. I don't think anyone's saying that these things shouldn't be supported. But I think like right now we just don't have enough information on how to act on a per user group basis. So like if we wanted to take Paris's proposal on, hey, a health beat check-in, maybe we could just pose the questions we'd like to see in that health beat check-in to get the facts we need to know how to act moving forward. That can be like the concrete task we take out of this. So like, what are the 5 questions we want to collect? And then in that messaging, we could send out information that's like, if you're a working group, we want to know what your terminal state is. If you don't have a terminal state, we're thinking about maybe making user groups, that type of thing. We can give some
Yeah, I
guidance
wasn't even aware that working groups were supposed to have a terminal state. I don't remember that when associated with the IoT Edge, and it makes no attempt to own any code.
Yeah, so I think
maybe some of these labels were like casually applied, like even labeling the thing maintainer track. How much thought went into that? So a logical exercise of using a word that nobody put a lot of research in and saying, oh, it doesn't fit the word anymore. Maybe you should redefine the rules rather than take some rules that you don't know the origin of and force them on.
I mean, I've been around long enough to know the origin of SIGs and working group rules. I just think they're being misapplied. So let's get the information and then figure out how to act next.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in to like, I'm going to time box this particular discussion. I think we've got kind of the main points. And like for me explicitly, like +1 to the particular action items that Derek has listed there. I think that starting with information gathering on the current state of our working groups and our user groups, and are they meeting what their current goals are, and kind of getting them, you know, some questions out and asking them to respond back to them. I think that's a great kind of first step. And then we can kind of figure out on a case-by-case basis what's the right fit for these. Should they be working groups, user groups? Should they move into the CNCF? All of that kind of stuff. I think we've got kind of a pretty concrete definition around what should be a SIG, but it gets a little bit fuzzier when we move kind of beyond the definition of SIG. So yeah, like I am definitely +1 on the action items that have been listed.
And reports on the working groups, I think, already exist because they've fallen under the same rules of reporting to the community meeting as SIGs did. So I know that my working group has been reporting for over a year at the community meetings. The decks got posted in those notes, and you might already have some data.
Hi, this is Hiro from CNCF speaking. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead, Hiro.
Perfect, yeah. I had some connectivity issues at the beginning, so I could not understand what are the benefits of moving the working groups out of the Kubernetes community to CNCF, and what are the benefits for them if they will move to CNCF. My specific concern is that the CNCF user groups were designed for the CNCF and user community, which is the community specifically for the CNCF end users. So the paid members who have joined us as the members, but with the extra title as the end users. So these groups were designed for them primarily, but I'd like to understand what are the concerns and what we will solve if we'll move the current user groups out of Kubernetes to CNCF. Because I mostly agree with, for example, Steven's arguments, for example, with the VMware group, because I remember my old ages when I was enrolled into the OpenStack SIG a few years ago, for example, and we also had numerous end users joining there and asking some questions, and we had some constant interactions. But again, that's mostly the Kubernetes specific on the conversations, not the CNCF wide. So
yeah, speaking for what I was trying to enumerate is I was basically saying we don't have the information to make a factual based recommendation right now. And so having the full list of present CNCF SIGs, like it's not in front of me, having a list of user groups wasn't in front of me, but just, it seems like the concrete next thing we could do is just figure out what is the vitality of each user group, what is the terminal criteria for a working group, which is the definition of the working group. And then from there, maybe recommend working groups go to user groups. But I don't think any one of us is in a position to say user groups go away. I was just trying to call it that we don't have the facts. And so we should just, the next item should be to go gather those facts. So hopefully no one's being construed as saying there's a final outcome or anything. It's just, let's gather the data.
I'm happy to help with this on the CNCF side. So if you have any information that you require from us, so I'm happy to assist with this.
I think what I would find useful is that if there are new SIGs being formed under the CNCF umbrella that are not visible in the TOC SIGs list. So like SIG runtime that got formed under CNCF, I think that's relatively new. If there are other ones in the works, for example, if there was a big data one or there was an edge one or anything like that, I think it'd be useful to like have that at least knowable. And, but I don't have that list in front of me right now. So.
Actually, everything that is formal is on GitHub under the CNCF TOC repo. I will also share the links here in the meeting notes. And also all the proposals should come through the issues or the pull requests. So if there is any formal conversation that is covering that, something should be listed on GitHub.
Cool.
Okay. So we've definitely had quite a bit of discussion on this topic. I'm going to put a last call out directed towards the steering folks. Is there anything else that you want to raise or talk about specifically on this issue before we move on? Okay,
sorry, Chris,
great.
I was trying to hit mute. I think the only question is, it seems like we want to follow up on 153. And so maybe just if we can get some volunteers to see that to completion. I don't know if the issue had an owner yet, but and then get something out to the group here to review and asking, are we good with this health check roll call information gathering setup?
I'll sign up for that. I'm reviewing it right now.
Cool. So I didn't know, Paris, if by opening that you were volunteering. Otherwise, I'm happy to volunteer with anybody else on trying to collaborate on a simple questionnaire.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that. Yeah, let's do it.
Cool.
Okay. So there's the other item in our agenda is to kind of look through our backlog. Before we end up doing that, I just wanted to open it up to if anybody has anything else pressing that they would like to raise to the group before we kind of just go through our backlog and make sure that things have owners, assignees, things are prioritized, etc. Cool. Okay. I'm going to find my screen sharing button. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
So 153, we just talked about this. That has assignees now, great. This one is on our SIG governance, our meeting criteria there, because I think we changed things when we redid the community meeting. Paris, did you want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think that there may have already been a PR in flight for this. Go to SIG Gov rules. If the first bullet says something, let's see, meet, here it is, second bullet, meet regularly at least for 30 minutes every 3 weeks, except for November and December. All right, and then where did we put report activity? There it is, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, yeah, so this can be closed.
Okay.
Yep. So yeah, I'll close out later.
Cool. Just move that over there. Community notes on sub-projects.
This is
Tim,
part.
did you have any comments on this one?
We can roll this into 153 because I think there was trying to find details and link to things on the community page. Not all sub-projects are actually listed there. So.
Right. And doing a roll call type audit would definitely help with that and getting it updated.
So I'll close this in favor of 153.
Sounds great. This one was Stevens. We talked about this earlier as far as the feedback from the user group creation process. I think what I'll do is I'll take this on as far as seeing if there's any other like specific action items we want to pull out of it, or if the stuff that we're going to do under 153 as far as like information gathering and auditing on user groups and that kind of stuff is enough, or if there's anything else specific that we want to handle there. So the next one is on the Kubernetes security fork. This is something that, like, yeah, this is something that I found concerning, and I wanted to make sure that it was tracked and not lost, but we haven't really done anything with it right now, where the CI for our fork was torn down because there were some problems with it and it wasn't maintained properly. But that, should there be something in the future that's like concerning from a security point of view and we need to get it properly tested, we don't have CI to do that right now. It feels important, but hasn't had enough like human power behind it to actually get it solved. Does anybody have any like thoughts or concerns on this one? If it's like something that we should prioritize, or I don't know if I'm just being like overly paranoid there.
Have you reached out to anybody from the PSC?
Not directly. I think at the point in time I talked to Jordan about it, and it's like, yeah, we don't have anything that's critical in the pipeline now, so we're not trying to, we don't necessarily need it immediately, but yeah, it was just a thing, like a mix of both technical resources and people resources to maintain that CI right now. So we'd say there just was a lack there. I'm not sure, like, there wasn't a clear boundary as far as owners. It was kind of like an ad hoc thing that like a few Googlers had access to and maintained for a while, but.
Yeah, this seems to be we need like somebody who can coordinate things here because this spread across so many different teams, different concerns. So until we find somebody who's like passionate about this thing, it's going to be hard to get momentum behind this.
Can we like put out an ask on KDev?
Well, I think like, sorry, I was just going to say, like, I think the reason that I opened up this issue here is because there wasn't a clear owner that was going to take control of like, okay, this is your responsibility as far as like a group within Kubernetes to make sure this happens. I don't think we're at the point of like soliciting volunteers for it because it needs ownership first. And the thing that I found at the time was basically like PSC was like this and test infra was like this, and everybody was like not clear on like whose responsibility within Kubernetes is it to make sure that this happens,
Sounds
at
like
least from an organizational standpoint.
The tragedy of the commons.
Nobody has an owner, then
Right.
it comes to us.
Yeah, well, one of the issues here is like we need, whoever it is needs to know how things are working right now, especially the test infra stuff, right? So it's going to be hard for somebody, if we put out a call on KDev, it's going to be hard for somebody coming in to figure that out.
And like the technical bits, I think there are folks that we can figure that out as far as like the technical implementation of it. I think at least from a steering standpoint, like at least having an owner. And for me, the two like most logical owners for this piece of infrastructure are either we say, SIG testing, you own this. It is a responsibility of yours to maintain this infrastructure. Please work with PSC and the infra working group and that kind of stuff to make sure that we maintain that. Because right now, that's SIG testing's responsibility for regular testing infrastructure. The other way to do it would be go to the PSC and be like, you're the main users of Kubernetes security, CI testing, and that kind of stuff. It's your responsibility to make sure that it's like, it's happening and it's up and it's running. And please go and coordinate with SIG testing and the infra working group to make sure it happens, because it'll be like a coordination between a couple different groups to make it happen. But it definitely needs like a specific owner, like the buck stops with this group to make sure that it's up and running.
Yeah, the latter sounds like the right thing to do for me, at least. The PSC is the user, so they know what they need from it. So they should coordinate. They should be the primary people responsible for this, at least from a coordination point of view. And like you said, we can always get technical help from different teams, including the Kate's infra stuff to make things work. But if we don't even know it's broken, there's and we are not on the PSC, so we won't even know what they need, right?
I'm okay with that. Like assigning like, hey, PSC, this is a responsibility we need you to take on for at least like owning and coordinating, keeping this infrastructure up. And if you need resources from other groups, then like, please coordinate with them. If you have problems, like let us know, but saying PSC, this is like now a documented responsibility of yours to make sure that this is up and running.
Yeah, I would start there. +1 from me.
+1 for me if you need +1.
Okay. I will take this one on, at least like documenting that, like submitting a PR for that, and talking with PSC ahead of time to make sure that that is working.
Oh, can I interrupt really quick, Christoph?
Go for it.
There was something that needs to be addressed on one of the last issues that we just skipped over. I thought it was about the community meeting. Hold on, I'm putting the link in chat so you have it, so you can share it on your screen. I thought it was about the SIG-Gov contradiction with the Thursday community meeting, and it's not. It was actually because I was digging around because of the community meeting stuff that I saw this problem as well. And the problem right now is that the first set of bullets, number 2 bullet, says that SIGs meet regularly at least for 30 minutes every 3 weeks except November, December. But then scroll down a little bit. Oh, sorry, Slack. Scroll down a little bit, and then in the organizational management section, it says that SIGs meet bi-weekly on Zoom. So one is telling SIGs that they need to meet once every 3 weeks, and the other one is saying that they need to meet bi-weekly. So which one should we go with? Because I feel like it's a contradiction to tell SIGs one or the other.
My initial gut says every 3 weeks is fine. That gives SIGs flexibility to reschedule, bump things around, not meet the 5th week of a month. And I don't think anything is necessarily lost by saying like every 3 weeks except November and December. So I'm like +1 for the first point as opposed to enforcing bi-weekly.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm fine with either. I was just like, let's just be consistent. That was my point. Nikita, anybody else?
+1 to 3 weeks. And we're gonna audit and do the roll call anyway, so I think it should be fine.
Cool.
+1 for me.
I think, yeah, that ties in with the roll call, and like that should be one of the questions. Like, are you consistently meeting every 3 weeks except November and December? Yes or no?
Yeah, I mean, the SIG governance, the way that it's laid out right now from a bullet list anyway, it could be turned into almost a checklist. So yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to keep going. We have about 5 more minutes. We'll get through as many of these as we can. Craft policy on requesting help for key areas. Tim.
Yeah, you were assigned to me. I don't know who else wanted to go along with this, but this has been in existence for a while. There's the roll board and stuff, but we were thinking about doing something a little more broad.
I don't know if you follow CNCF TOC. Matt Klein just did a special projects guidance thing as well. I don't know if we can turn that into a smaller Kubernetes version. Just saying that there's prior art.
Could you put a link to that in this, please?
Yeah, for sure.
So it looks like Tim initially opened this. Dims had responded as well. Are the two of you still coordinating on this?
So right now it is, there's 3 of us who were talking about it, Mitesh, Damini, and myself, and there is a doc linked from there. We haven't been able to catch up after the December holidays, since Damini and Mitesh have some prior commitments and they haven't been able to make time for this yet. So I'm hoping to get this going again in a couple of weeks when I am in India. I'm hoping to see both of them there.
Okay. So you're going to take lead for steering on this, Dims?
Yes. If anybody has any comments, please take a look at the document. Document has some stuff already.
Sounds good. The next issue here was the steering committee election retro. I think this is just waiting on Bob, who was one of the election officers, to kind of update some docs. I don't think there's much else to be added to this one.
Yeah, that's pretty much done. I'll get with Bob. Everything's committed to GitHub.
Okay, great. Thanks, George. And I think we'll get squeeze one more in here.
This could be fall underneath auditing if we wanted it to, but there's a bunch of cruft that we have laying around and we've never finished cleaning it out.
Yeah, I know that like from the GitHub administration team that is under Contribax, we have been doing this for Incubator to get everything moved out of Incubator and either into KSIGs or into Kubernetes retired. But we haven't looked at doing that for the main org, but that may be something that we can look at doing next and see if there's any.
Yeah, I think it occurs across, I said Kubernetes Starwork, so it's like across Incubator, across Kubernetes proper org, across a number of the sub-elements that are there. So like, you know, if we took on Audit to include this, it's much bigger. Or we can empower the people that are working on K-org to, you know, have at it. Because Incubator, for example, there's no reason that a lot of those things shouldn't have found a new home by now. It's been a long time, like over a year, so.
I think the big thing is we just didn't force them. Like the folks in Incubator, like when we initially introduced KSIGs, we just said like, if you want to keep living in Incubator, like there's no need to move now. And then it was just finally getting to a point of like, okay, no, we don't need to maintain two orgs. This is kind of silly. Like, let's just either, if you're active, get your SIG sign off of moving you over to SIGs or retire you.
Yeah, we should do some enforcement action here because it's kind of like bar time, right? You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here.
I think we can take this up as a GitHub management thing.
Yeah, like it's not that difficult to run like a report and see like who's just been inactive, like what repos do or do not have a lot of activity, and like should you still stick around here. That part is definitely very easy. As far as which ones should move to SIGs versus stay in the main org, I think that gets just slightly trickier because yeah, there's history there. So at this point, we are now over time. I'm gonna cut everything off there. Thank you so much for everybody for coming. If you have further questions or comments, you can reach out to the steering committee via email or via Slack. Those addresses for both are in our steering committee meeting notes. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.
We're just getting heated up. We're just getting started, Christoph. Just getting started. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday, everyone.